Welcome to In the Funnel. My name is Mark Cox. In the Funnel is a group of sales coaches and consultants that help B2B sales teams dramatically improve revenue. Clients come to us when revenue growth is stagnated, or their sales team is not meeting expectations, or they need to recalibrate their sales and go-to-market plan for the upcoming year. Our clients have enjoyed tremendous success working within the funnel, and please hear it straight from them by listening to the testimonial section of this website. What they'll tell you is there's two things that make us unique and different in our space. Number one, we have a process and a methodology. First, for understanding your current state, and then second, for building your sales and go-to-market plan for the upcoming year. The second thing that makes us unique and different is that everybody within the funnel has run a material sales organization in their recent past. We're all practitioners. We don't have any theorists or teachers, and what that means is we can get in front of your sales team and run the next sales meeting, or join them on their next sales call to close your next large prospect. All of us have a passion for professional, disciplined, process-driven sales, and we'd be delighted to talk to you if you're looking to grow revenue for your company. Please feel free to reach out to us through this website at info@inthefunnel.com or by telephone. Thanks for taking the time to watch this.
So what we see is the best emails, the ones that are getting the most response, are personalized. They're painfully short. It like hurts sales reps to see how short it should be, which is somewhere between 25 and 50 words. Now, we've found that you can buy yourself some time with good personalization, the use of the right tonality, but after 75 words, like that reply rate just falls off. And these things change over time, right? As things become pattern, the trend shifts. So this time, actually this past spring, right? Shorter worked really well, but you could also write a really long, thoughtful note and still perform well. A year ago, it was 125 words was like the peak, right? Just sort of take Kyle Coleman's like posts on the internet and just like turn them into an email and you're like good to go. Now Kyle's posting about writing 50-word emails because that's what the data says, right? But even before that, when we first got started, like length wasn't even really a determining factor of what drove a response. And so we're seeing these trends change real time, month to month. And so it's just a matter of like, I think, staying on top of those things, but also just like putting a conscious effort towards being thoughtful in your outreach.
David, this one's going to be really interesting for you, I think, today. I'll start with a couple of questions. In your inbox, how many unread emails, how many emails do you get every day? And then how many unread emails are in your inbox?
Yeah, I don't know, Mark. I mean, I'd be guessing, but I will tell you that I receive, probably 300 and emails per day. And that's even, I try to be diligent and move things to junk if I don't want them anymore. So that's despite, now my junk email box also fills up too. And I just have no capability or ability to look at those emails and give them any meaningful thought unless there's a name that jumps out at me like that, okay, I need to, respond to this or look at this. So it's, I don't know, email to me is almost dead, Mark. Almost dead.
It'll be interesting to find out the perspective of our guest today. So I think the stats are there's 300 billion emails that go back and forth every day. Folks like us get between 200 and 300 emails. I treat it like a hit list. It feels like work to me all the time. I get very little good news in email. And I get a ton of spam where nobody, everybody's using some engagement or sequencing technology that they're using to reach out to me. And they're automating it, looking for a super low response rate, but in the meantime, polluting my inbox with stuff I don't need to see, including, by the way, a lot of sales training companies reaching out to me, a sales training company, to see if I need sales training. Okay.
So Mark, I almost see email like the ocean, right? That the emails come in like a big wave, and if I don't respond to them right away, they just sort of get sucked out to sea. And even if it's a good email, there's no way to track it or manage it unless it's immediately right at that very moment, right?
Why not at least do some research? Try and sell me hair tonic. Okay, I might be interested in that, but I don't need sales training if we're a sales training company. So we don't have a lot of CEOs or founders of technology companies, talking about the capability, but we've invited Will Allred, who runs Lavender. And Lavender is really sort of kind of content strategy. They have an interesting tool that helps you actually generate a point of interest, do some research, generate a point of interest for somebody you're reaching out to, and then they actually help you write a better email. That tool enables that. And they have insights in terms of what works and what doesn't. And people using their tool get a very, very high response rate, but it's not because they're emailing gazillions of people. His recommendation is to reach out to far fewer people, but do it in a more intelligent way. And so that's why I was really excited to kind of speak to Will today. I've heard him on a couple of other podcasts and read some of the things that he's written. I think he's going to be a really interesting guest for us today. And all of us are leveraging this channel today. So let's spend a few minutes here and learn about some best practices with email reach out. Here's Will Allred. Hey, Will, welcome to the show. Thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, Mark, thanks for having me on.
So really interested to kind of dive into this topic, Will, of email marketing, right? 300 billion emails go back and forth every day. The number's staggering. Feels like 50, 60% of them these days are spam. The numbers used to always say 45 to 50. And you guys have this really unique approach to maximizing that channel. But before we jump into that, tell us just a little bit about your personal journey in professional sales.
Yeah. So I started Lavender around 2 years ago now, right at the start of COVID. My co-founders and I had been building a marketing technology product focused on customer segmentation for about 2 years, working with brands like Yamaha, Gravity Blankets, a lot of co-working space. So you can imagine COVID rolls around and a lot of your revenues coming from co-working, you have to start rethinking things.
Yeah.
So with that, we did what a lot of teams needed to do during that time period, and we pivoted. So we took a lot of the content intelligence behind our product and applied that to a channel that we thought was going to become more popular during COVID, and that was email. So like the first version of the product was super simple. It was like information on who you're reaching out to, and then some feedback on whether or not you wrote a good note. And continued to iterate on that and really found ourselves enveloped into the world of sales. It's sort of an interesting entrepreneurial issue of having a cool thing and not knowing who to sell it to. But at the same time, like, sales folks pulled us in, and we're basically like, we need this now more than ever. And the stats actually back that up. So during those like first few months of COVID, a lot of like main lines were down. And so folks had no other way other than email to get a hold of someone. And so what you saw was the amount of outbound email volume 2x, and it really hasn't slowed down. But the amount of replies coming back nearly halved, pulling those stats from HubSpot. But you look at something like that, and it really just kind of comes back to the buyer's experience. David, you could probably relate to this. Most of the emails that enter your inbox aren't very good. Am I wrong with that?
But they're terrible. So I've got I must have about 400,000 or 500,000 unread emails because I just don't have time, and they're not interesting.
Yeah. So the way that we're approaching this is we're thinking about, okay, we see millions of emails every single month. What are the attributes that make for a better note? And so we're able to provide that real-time feedback for sellers. And as a byproduct, they've been seeing on average 2x the amount of response. Now, one of the things that's been really interesting in my own journey is I've been able to take a lot of what I'm learning from our own data and just sharing that publicly. And that's really what's given me the opportunity to have conversations like the one today.
Yeah. Well, it's so powerful. It's the value that every technology provider brings to the table is they see the entire landscape of everybody using the tool. So let's drill down on that just a little bit, Will, because you said prior to COVID, I think the stats prior to COVID, from most of the sources I knew, said 300 billion emails going back and forth every day, and 45 to 50% of them were spam. And then you said that increased during COVID, of course. Great timing for your offering, by the way. And who among us wouldn't want to write a better email that's more compelling, that gets a response? And I love, about Lavender, that you actually go and you pull the point of interest. You do the research and pull the point of interest. So before we get to the body of an email and some of the science you've got behind that, tell us about the research you do and how you pull a point of interest. If I'm sending an email to David Fauser, or let's say I'm trying to sell sales training to David, how does Lavender help?
Yeah, so I think this comes back to a few different points, right? With the number of emails entering someone like David's inbox only increasing, his mental spam filter, the walls that he puts up as he goes through his inbox, have only become more stringent. The average amount of time that someone's going to spend reading your email is down to about 10 seconds. That seems to continuously decrease. But that's not to say like attention spans have like shrunk or anything. It's to say that how we should be approaching email has really changed. The things to sort of recognize as far as a shift in outbound strategy is like the days in which volume was a competitive differentiator are dead.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Everyone has a sequencing tool. Everyone has a cadencing tool. And we're going to see people instinctively go back to this world of like, how can I be more efficient? How can I try to do things more efficiently? And as a company, we're coming out and we're, putting our flag on efficiency is no longer what you should be focused on. It's effectiveness. If I can send 20 emails a day, and those 20 lead to 5 interesting conversations and one of those closes, like that's a better funnel than if I'm having my sales rep spending time just trying to get a bunch of volume out the door with these dated ideas of, oh, we've got to touch X many contracts, etc. So that's really by and large why we're so gung-ho about making sure when somebody goes to email somebody, they have relevant information on the individual, but also the company that they work for as they go to write that message, but then also giving them prompts, nudges to show them how they could use that information to potentially start a conversation or start an email.
Nice. So can you give us an example of that? Completely agree, by the way, Will. Like, who among us, the one thing I like about what you're saying here is it's that noise that's making this so much more difficult to stand out in any meaningful way, or easy, I guess.
Yeah.
There's just so much pollution out there in email these days because of all of those tools that say, hey, let's send out a gazillion emails that are not personalized, generic, and we're hoping 0.1 of 0.1% respond to us.
Yeah, and it's one of those things, like we regularly see reply rates with our clients in the double digits.
Wow.
And so like the thinking that you have to have is not how can I hit as many accounts as possible. It's how many good conversations can I start today? And so a good example of this is taking the job board of a company, for example. So I'm going to research David. I pull up the job board for the company. I see that he's hiring in EMEA. Great. Now I can start a conversation around, hey, I see you're going to try to expand out in EMEA. Usually when we work with teams, they try to use the same playbooks that worked in the US, but aren't sure if that's going to be effective. If you could segment out the factors that we're driving conversions in EMEA versus the US within your written language, would that be helpful, right? The idea being like, yeah, I'm just trying to start a conversation around like, hey, as you do this, do you feel like you know what's working in EMEA versus what worked in the past in the US? That was like a rough draft. The idea being, I'm just getting the idea out on paper, and then we would edit that down to make it a little bit easier to read, a little bit snappier. But that's sort of the starting point, is that trigger of like, hey, this is probably a really good reason for me to try to have a conversation with David today.
And just on that part of it then, Will, which by the way, of course, having that level of personalization, or, when somebody knows, something about something about them, they might have a higher propensity to respond instead of some generic, garbage that gets sent out there. How do you guys do that? What are you doing? What's the technology doing to actually pull those data points or those reference points into the email?
Yeah, so we use conglomeration of different data providers to pull that in, right? We're not trying to be the big bad data provider, right? The Zoom Infos, the Clearbits, the Seamless AIs of the world have gone after that, and they've done a great job. We partner with them so that when you're going to do your email, you have that at your fingertips. Now, what we do that's proprietary to us is we give you that real-time feedback on how you're coming across, what you're saying. And then we also, take those potential data points, say from the job board, and we will turn them into potential ways to start. So that's really based off of like framework design of, how to think about writing a really good email.
And boy, writing that really good email, maybe we can talk about each stage of the process here, but if we're on the kind of top of the funnel stage for the time being, and, as you aptly point out, David gets, let's assume 300 emails a day.
Mm-hmm.
So his email becomes his action register or a task list. Email, nothing good comes to me via email, by the way. Almost nothing comes in that's positive for me via email. Lots of work, lots of tactical stuff, but my good news tends to come in other channels.
Mm-hmm.
But if he's running through and he's going to spend maybe 10 seconds, how long should that perfect email reach out be? Maybe 25, 30 words kind of thing?
So if you think about the average amount of time someone's going to spend reading, it's 10 seconds. The average person on the other end is going to spend around 40 words. Now, most emails are cold emails are somewhere between 125 to 150 words.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And so what you're finding is most people aren't reading what you're writing. They're categorizing it. They pull out a few keywords and then they're like, okay, I know what that is. And so your email is essentially running up against the mental spam filter. So what we see is the best emails, the ones that are getting the most response, are personalized. They're painfully short. It hurts sales reps to see how short it should be, which is somewhere between 25 and 50 words. Now, we've found that you can buy yourself some time with good personalization, the use of the right tonality, but after 75 words, that reply rate just falls off. And these things change over time, right? As things become pattern, the trend shifts. So this time, actually this past spring, right? Shorter worked really well, but you could also write a really long, thoughtful note and still perform well. A year ago, it was 125 words was the peak, right? Just sort of take Kyle Coleman's posts on the internet and just turn them into an email and you're good to go. Now Kyle's posting about writing 50-word emails because that's what the data says, right? Mm-hmm. But even before that, when we first got started, length wasn't even really a determining factor of what drove a response. And so we're seeing these trends change real time, month to month. And so it's just a matter of I think staying on top of those things, but also just putting a conscious effort towards being thoughtful in your outreach. So if you're thinking about what it means to put together an email, you talked about bringing it to the top. The first thing that is involved is doing your research, right? If you're going to put it out into 4 main pillars, there's your research, there's putting your thoughts on paper, there's editing those thoughts that went out on paper, and then there's seeing the results and then going back to the front end and iterating. So for research, it's about what you do, what you solve, who you're solving it for, and like figuring out a process for finding that information as quickly as possible, aka like the indicators that would tell you that this person on the other end has a problem. If you're selling equipment to hockey arenas, right, it's the obvious trigger would be they're building a new arena, right? Or it's been a while since they last updated their last contract with a vendor, and it's like probably time for maintenance, and that pain point of maintenance is starting to come into play. Some of that's going to be from your own first party, some of that's third party, right? The thing to recognize is building a process that takes all of that into account, so that you're like being thoughtful about really why you're showing up, but the feeling that you're hoping to evoke from the other side, to quote Sam McKenna, is to show them that you know them. You want them to feel as though you have a deep understanding of their current scenario and the problems that they face as a byproduct. And so when you go to write a message, you're really just like tying those things together between an observation and the insight of the problems that you derive from that observation.
Yeah, great. So logical. By the way, who did you quote there? Was it Sam McKenna?
Sam McKenna from Sam Sales.
Sam Sales. So Samantha McKenna, that's good to know. That there's somebody will do some research. We'll put Samantha on this show.
She's great. You totally should.
Yeah. So I don't know about David. He'll weigh in a sec, but there's nothing you put out here that doesn't seem so just inherently logical to anyone listening, that says, don't send a generic email. Nobody wants to be a number. Personalize it. Understand their point of view, what they're going through. I try and identify that they've got a propensity or they've got the problem you solve for in advance. And tell me about how, and we haven't mentioned it enough in the podcast so far, but tell me how Lavender, which is the tool folks should look at, and we're going to have a link in the podcast notes. Tell me how Lavender helps with all of these things, because will Lavender actually create the first draft of the email I should use?
We can, of course. So there's 4 parts about writing an email. You've got the research, you've got the content creation, the editing, and then the testing, iteration, learning side of the house. And so for each piece of that puzzle, we have solutions. So we have our research tools where you can pull up information on the individual, their company. And we put that in the inbox so that you're not like fumbling around trying to find that information. For content creation, you can put in a series of bullet points of ideas that you want to help generate, and we can start a draft for you. We can also just like get you started from the personalization elements themselves. The content editing, this is really our sweet spot. So, live time, you've got a scorecard of how likely your email is to get a response. We'll show you a to-do list of everything you need to fix. In a lot of cases, we can fix those things for you. But we'll also show you like how you're coming across in that message as well. That seems to be a really appreciated feature, and actually has some impact on response as well. So I can talk about tonality and cold email if you like. But the last piece, and this is the thing that I'm most bullish on, is our coaching dashboard. And that is, taking the black box that is your email and starting to shine a light on the individual contributors, the teams that are really driving performance, and explaining why that's the case so that you can replicate it across your organization. Thinking about it as like what Gong did for the phone call, trying to turn that out for the inbox.
And nice messaging, by the way. That's again, I can't imagine there's too many folks out there who don't want this. What do you think, David? How does this sound to you?
Yeah, it sounds great. One of the things what's really interesting what Will's talking about is I've found personally in the past couple of months, more of my reps saying, hey, I sent them an email, I've got no response. So it's interesting that he would say that 50 is the new sort of number, 25 to 40. And because probably they're just, looking over them. And I think that sometimes with a rep, they have a personal relationship with some of their clients, but that personal relationship doesn't guarantee that they're reading the email. And so I think that's something that I've taken from this. Another point I've taken from this, Will, as you're going through what Lavender does, I immediately started thinking about pre-call planning as maybe a spin-off to the email writing, because a lot of these are the elements that Mark teaches, for example, for getting ready before a call. And have you ever heard of anybody coming back to you saying, I also use this for other purposes other than email?
We've heard some crazy other use cases. Someone wrote a speech to the DC City Council using our product. So like we've seen it all. So pre-call planning, that's like tame. There is some functionality in there that's certainly helpful. Couple that I think of is thinking about the personalization process when you're writing. We added a simple note-taking application so that you can store your notes in a single place, take them across platforms. And so you can pull those up before your call. Additionally, we have, personality metrics that you can reference to, maybe do some pre-call planning to decide how you're going to frame potential value props, or how you're going to focus a line of questioning. If somebody scores higher for a trait known as agreeability, right? How I approach them, how I potentially push on a topic might change. If they're less agreeable, I'm going to feel more comfortable being more aggressive with that push. If they're less, I might soften up my approach, and I might focus a lot more of my messaging. Say they're more people oriented as opposed to task oriented. I might push a little bit more of my messaging on thinking about how this is going to impact and affect others throughout the org, so that I align with the way that they see the world around them. So pre-call notes make sense. We really see the product not necessarily just as an SDR tool. It's typically how we enter an organization, because there's a lot of financial impact when it comes to outbound messaging, because you tend to see the least amount of conversions there. But we really see this full cycle. Post-demo follow-up is just as important as that cold message.
Post-meeting, right? So, or post-proposal presentation.
Totally.
All of those things. And the one thing I really like, frankly, the other thing that jumps out to somebody like me is the editing. Like just being able to write professionally. Some basic professional writing skills are badly missing in professional sales today. They're shockingly missing in professional sales today. So I think there's some real help there.
Yeah, and the way we see it is, one, can we help people frame up the information in the right way? But can we also make sure that they're meeting the buyer where the buyer's at, in a way that the buyer's going to understand it? And so there's some framework pieces that we're building out now, but some of the core attributes that we tend to see drive success are like mobile functionality. So we show what an email is going to look like on a phone, and you can edit it there. And the thinking there is really simple, which is your email is 8 times more likely to have its initial read through on a mobile device. And so particularly when you're in the reply, when you're in thread with somebody, it's one of the top reasons that conversations die. The other reason being you didn't ask a question. I always teams always give me a look when I say that. And I'm like, so I write you an email, you respond back with, hey, how does this integrate with Salesforce? Right. Or, how do you work with clients that use this, technology stack? And sellers enter this regurgitation mode instead of getting curious. And we actually see it in the data, which is always so fascinating to me. The ideal amount of questions you're asking back is 3. It's not just oh, why are you asking about Salesforce? It's you need to introduce a line of questioning that shows them that there's something more on the other end.
Right. How could this impact productivity if we do integrate with Salesforce? Or how are you thinking leveraging this tool? What's on your mind? Something like that to get them coming back.
Exactly. I can't remember who said it to me, but they phrased it perfectly, which is, as soon as they feel as though they know everything that they need to know, you pretty much become an order taker, as opposed to being much more consultative in your approach and asking questions. Email is still a piece of the communication cycle. It's going to be really like key in making sure that your team doesn't get ghosted. The prospect doesn't just disappear on you.
Yeah.
But also making sure that when you do get on the phone with them, they view you as a credible expert in what it is that you came to talk to them about.
Sure. What an interesting, whoever said that, what an interesting point, because you probably know these folks well, but Matt and Brent from Challenger Sale, Matt Dixon's new book's called The Jolt Effect. He speaks about, he talks about, hey, first you want to see the status quo, but then you have to dial down the fear of implementation. And that's, there's a huge percentage of deals going to no decision, even though the status quo is not good enough. People don't want to make the decisions for fear of failure. So when you say, as soon as they think they know everything, the reality of it is on most of the larger deals that you see out there, no one ever feels like they know everything.
Mm-hmm.
Like if you're a credible source, they keep coming back. They'll close, they'll finish, but they're just curious about everything, because as soon as they do the deal, they're curious about implementation and risk mitigation and so on and so on and so on, tracking value, making sure you get the value that was originally forecast. So
yeah,
no one ever feels like they know everything.
Yeah, it's interesting. When I hear stuff like that, I haven't read the book yet. It's on my list. But when I hear stuff like that, the idea of a deal going to no decision, one of the things that comes to my mind is how we originally approached the conversation. And that is, did you actually show up with a clear point of view on their business, with like a very specific focal point in how you wanted to help them make progress within their own business?
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of times sellers kind of show up in this informative format and they're like, hey, here's the cool stuff that we can do. I think this could be interesting. Do you want to talk? Mm-hmm. Versus showing up and saying, I see this, it makes me think that, and like, here's very specifically how I think we can help your business, because that has a very clear path to how you get started, as opposed to like, oh, let's just like hash out some ideas on the phone and like figure out like where this could be a good like time to engage kind of thing.
Yeah. I love that research. Again, as long as you make it all about them, I see this, which makes me think that. I'd love to have a conversation with you about trying to help you run a better business.
Yeah.
That's, but it's not a blind conversation. It's after I actually know who you are and I've done some research and have a reason for a call. And guess who does that? Management consultants. They have no product. They don't sell anything. They just do they do some value engineering of some of your business metrics online, and then have a conversation and say, I see this, which makes me think that, because this is what's happening with your peer groups. I'd love to have a conversation about how we get you into that top tier for metric A, B, C, or D. And CEOs always take those meetings from Bain, McKinsey, the Boston Consulting Group. They don't have any difficulty getting those meetings.
Yeah. And my background, by the way, before startups was in consulting. So like,
is it?
That resonates.
Yeah. Some of that's showing here. I got a great, when Dan Pink was on our podcast doing the same thing you're doing, Will, at the end, I go, where's professional sales going? Or David did. I can't remember who asked him. And he comes back and he went on a super articulate 3-minute soliloquy about sales is management consulting. He said, everything else is going to go away, but sales is management consulting at the highest level. Were you going to jump in, David? Sorry, I think I interrupted you.
It's fine, Mark. Yeah, like I was basically going to say the same thing. So, but some really interesting things here to really think about in regards to communication. Like I often before this call, I think was sort of thinking email was dead, but it sounds like it's very much still alive as a method. But you just have to change things up a little bit, almost evolve with where what the market's seeing. But it sounds like it has some good success. And it's not just for prospecting, right? It's not just for prospecting, it's for everything that we communicate with, right? So that's some interesting tips that you brought forward to us and for our listeners.
Yeah, well, and David, I think the thing that like email's dead if your approach to email is trying to get somebody to convert or buy something. Email is very much so alive if you come well-researched, looking to just start a conversation. Mark, your points on like sales moving to management consulting are really interesting, because I think about the way a lot of teams, best practice wise, are really approaching like the idea of cadence design or building cadences. And cadence is really just a series of follow-ups reaching out to typically an individual within an account. The best teams right now that I see are sort of taking that approach and applying it at the account level. And so they're mapping out who's above the line of making a purchase decision, who are all the people involved, but also below the line, who's going to be affected on the day-to-day, but doesn't necessarily have impact, but do influence those above the line buyers. I'm seeing a huge shift towards that, whether you're talking about $100,000+ deals or like $10,000 deals, where folks are trying to figure out ways to orchestrate a much more thoughtful series of outreaches across an entire organization. And the best of the best really think about it simply as like, how can I find a way to get the clearest point of view about this business so that I can have the straightest path towards helping them make progress as an organization?
The reason I think this is so successful, Will, because everything you just said is all about them.
Yeah, absolutely. It's all about them. Yeah. Easier said than done, right, Mark? I mean, it's just that little bit of discipline, and like how often, we know that, call planning works. We know that, thinking about personalizing an email works. We know all that, but how often do you get them? Like, I mean, that's the, like, I can't think of a personalized email I've received in the past month from a potential vendor. Right. So it's a real advantage, I think, if you sort of just listen to these simple tips, whether you use the software or not. I mean, it seems like a real competitive advantage you can get.
Yeah. My goal, David, is actually like with our content, I want to teach you how to do it without my software. Yeah. Right. Like our software makes it easier if like that's the path you want to go down. But like my goal is like you could do it without. And it's been a successful strategy for us because people then inherently recognize that it's easier, but all of these things can be done without software, right? Software in this case is really just more around efficiency.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, no one ever buys technology. They buy what it does for them. And what I love about this is just educating people as to what this is almost core basic sales training in the software. That's what it really is. It's core basic sales training saying, you're not allowed to reach out to somebody unless you actually know who they are and you have a point of view on it, and you have a point of interest. And then secondly, understand their world. So you do have, hey, this is what I noticed, and this leads me to think this. If you can't answer those two questions, don't waste someone's time yet. Just go back and do your work, and then reach out to them. But don't pollute the universe with marketing bump, because it won't work anyway.
Yeah.
It just, sorry, go ahead.
No, it's interesting you say that, because like I see so many teams like have this gut response of like, well, how does that scale? Yeah, how can we make sure we're touching enough accounts if that's what we're doing? I'm like, okay, you touch the account, but was it in a meaningful way? Like, did they actually, like, are you driving like a high quality conversion? We're working right now on like pulling the math out on this, but like this idea of like persona at scale type outbound, like, does it actually drive like the down funnel efficiency that you think it does? Or do those deals typically take longer than when you actually show up with a clear point of view? I have my hypothesis about how that's going to turn out. It's like, it's definitely going to be more efficient if I show up with a clear point of view. But it's, to me, I think our organization is like a clear example of that. When we go outbound, right, we're getting replies. Latest reply rate data from our team was right around 35%.
Wow.
For one every our outreaches, or out of 3 outreaches, we get at least one thing back, right?
Wow.
And it's because we're being thoughtful about it. We're doing our research. So it's Yeah, I advise teams to rethink that, because you really can drive the efficiency you're looking for. It just comes from a different sort of perspective, and you're not necessarily burning every single account along the way.
Well, and you know what? Think of how many over the last 5 years, how many companies have burned relationships with accounts with these generic bump motherhood and apple pie email blasts that just fill somebody's inbox, and that impression matters, right? And I think the opposite is also the case. Somebody may not respond to that first email or that first voicemail, but if you've done your research, you have a point of interest, you do build an impression in their mind that, hey, Will's pretty good at this, or he actually took the time to understand who I am. And I might be too busy to respond right now, but maybe when he catches me on the phone while I'm driving home, I'll take that call because he earned that right because of 2 or 3 valuable reach outs. And so I like everything about this in terms of elevating the profession, which is kind of what we're about here. Let me ask a nutty question here, Will. You're a smart guy. You're probably ahead of this. How far down the road before I'm not even involved in this at all? It's just AI is doing all of this. So
Yeah.
intelligent reach out, point of interest is selected, assessing the tonality required for that particular buyer, all those kinds of things. And all they do is they let me know when somebody wants a live conversation with me.
Yeah, so I think there's like a few avenues here. I could see a lot of that happening on the inbound front, right? If you give a really intelligent AI enough context on what you do, and someone comes in inbound and raises their hand, I think there's like a valid path forward where almost like a chat interface, AI is able to take that conversation. Now, outbound, I don't know if it really makes sense to automate that, because you're getting back to this point of like efficiency versus effectiveness. You're also like robbing sales professionals of this development opportunity where they have to think through logically why they're actually talking to someone, right? It's almost an enablement exercise in and of itself to like have somebody formulate this point of view on a business and like strategically think through the account and actually do that outreach. If you start automating that, what's the quality of seller that you end up having 1 to 2 years down the road versus the team that enables the team to think through these things and get creative and do that outreach.
Don't worry about the quality of seller. We'll train them and take care of that. That's what we do. We've got a lot of that. So all of your people listening to this, don't worry, we'll take care of that very nicely. Let me ask you this question, Will. So what are you reading right now? You're a smart guy in an interesting space. What are you reading in terms of our world these days?
Well, I'm rereading this book, Scaling Up.
Oh, Vern. God bless Vern Harnish.
We are growing the organization. So with that come its own trials and tribulations. The other book I'm reading, both they're both on my table, is Think Again by Adam Grant. So 2 books that I'm reading right now that also happen to be within arm's reach. So that was
there you go. We caught you at home today, I guess.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Is that a Peloton in the background?
It is.
Yeah, Mark and I are big Peloton guys.
Well, this guy's he's part of the club,
Oh,
David?
man.
We just want him in the club now. He's reading our books.
That's right.
He's got the Peloton bike. We're going to hook up with him. We're not going to ask about the scores on the Peloton. That might be inappropriate at this point in time of our relationship. It's too early. What are you reading right now, David?
I was going to say, I haven't gotten to ride as much as I want to. So those scores are probably, they're not where they should be.
You're a lot younger than us. They better be higher than ours.
That's
but what a great tool that bike is, isn't it?
No, it's great. And like there's some aspects to it that like we think about in our own product design. I remember when we were first getting started and we were thinking about like the scoring that they put out there, the leaderboards. A lot of that fueled product innovation that we were putting out. The one thing that we didn't do is sort of like, if you think about a Peloton, right? The score can go up to any number. right? As long as it's a combination of your wheels turning and like resistance added. And like one of the things we played around with early on was like this idea of there is no like 100. You can score a 115. And you're like, what does that actually mean?
Yeah.
It turns out that's actually really confusing to a seller trying to figure out when to hit send. So we opted for a clearer grading rubric, but
That's great.
It's a great tool indeed.
We think about that. We think about Peloton a lot right now in terms of, we have an online learning academy as well. So if you go to our training, we want to reinforce some of the core principles. And because of the forgetting curve, nobody can remember what takes place in the room. So nobody can. So you got to have this thing they can go back to. I just love everything about Peloton. And prior to COVID, I would have never been someone who enjoyed a spin class. But because I'm an athlete, but not for like a spin class, but I just think it's magnificent.
Yeah, it's funny you bring up the forgetting curve. This is one of the main pieces of feedback we get from teams is like, oh, okay, so like my team figures out how to write a good email. Like, now what? And I'm like, okay, well, if you churn, I will see you again in about 35 days because your email performance will fall off. And they're like, oh. And I'm like, I mean, you're more than welcome to try it. And that's why like we have a month-to-month offering. So like you can always come back. But it always like cracks me up because like some of our biggest accounts, that's actually happened. I remember getting a phone call from like a sales leader not too long ago. Now I give people the warning of like this phone call happening. And like they're like, okay, you've convinced us. Like, I can't believe that email just went out the door.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's funny because like people are overconfident in their ability to reinforce their own behaviors, and I think there's something to that.
There's no question. Watch any professional sport you love. So David and I are hockey fanatics. I'm a hockey fanatic and still play to this day. The people I play hockey with have been playing hockey since they've been 4 years old. Yet for some reason, somebody still has to yell at the center to chase back and pick up the third guy or the second guy on a 2-on-1. He's been on the ice for 5 days a week for the better part of his, life. But someone still has to call him to do that. Watch the NHL. They're yelling at the guy to get the third man coming back. Why do they need to be told that? You do. Yeah. We need those things that kind of keep us aligned. That's why a fitness trainer works. I perform better when somebody's watching me and keeping me in line.
There's accountability to it too.
Totally. What are you reading these days, Mr. David Fauser?
Well, I'm reading, how much I love this book here, and I continually go back to it, which is Moving My Models to Mindsets, which is a fantastic book. Really, really good book. And then I'm reading this, Mark, Sales Enablement 3.0, which is
Roger Jefferson.
Yeah, so I'm looking forward to meeting him shortly as we continue to go. But I've got one final question for you, Will. I noticed on your website that you've partnered with a company called PandaDocs. And as I was, going through this conversation with you and communication, one of the things that PandaDocs does is that you send proposals and documents out with it, and they show you how long people spend on each page. And sometimes we have like, $10-20 million proposals going out, and they spend 1 second on all of the technical stuff and the price page, and they'll spend 3 minutes on something that could have taken us 4 or 5 months to produce. And I'm just wondering, like, as you evolve as an organization, do you see yourself maybe growing into a bigger communications platform with sales proposals and et cetera? Because it all sort of, to me, is similar in the sense of getting your message across, making sure it's relevant and all of those things. I was just curious if you're doing anything on that front.
Yeah, we've gotten requests for all sorts of interesting things in that regard. I remember one of the first things people were pointing out was like, you should have Lavender for slide decks. Overall, we think of what we do as, we are a content intelligence company that happens to sell productivity software. So if someday down the line, PandaDoc wants to do like an API connection and we can help like people draft up better proposals, I think that'd be really cool. Like personally, I'm like into it. How that comes to life, TBD. But for now, we're focused on email.
Which just makes common sense. Everything you talk about makes
Yeah.
common sense. And it's great that you focus on the email area, which I think is really super important. It drives a lot of revenue and a lot of connection points. And like you said, it's not about making the sale from the email. It's about driving that positive conversation or that, meaningful conversation. So it's almost like a mind frame shift for some salespeople. Like, I'm not trying to make a sale through this. I'm just trying to get a good conversation to eventually lead towards that, right? So I think there's a lot of really good stuff here, Mark, in regards to this conversation with Will, like just a lot of good practical advice for frontline salespeople, managers, et cetera, and some pretty good software if you want to get some confidence and some validation on what you're doing, which is harder and harder to find these days. So I think that's all sounds really interesting to me. Will, thank you.
Yeah. Hey, thank y'all.
Well, guys, I mean, I really believe there's a common sense revolution coming in sales. And maybe it's been taking place for a while quietly, but at the end of the day, everything we talked about was just so inherently logical, and it was all a client first discussion. And I think that's where this common sense revolution is going to lead us. And Will, what a great chat today. We'd keep going. We'd be talking for hours about this. At some point in time, let's get together live and do that over a couple of beers.
Be fun.
But I just want to say thank you for joining us today. What a great conversation. And clearly the people listening to this are going to want to learn more. How do they find more out about Will Allred and then Lavender?
Yeah. So I think the easiest way would be via LinkedIn. More than welcome to email me. It's just first name last name at lavender.ai. The other thing is just try the product. It's literally free to install. We have an easy to use trial where you can get a feel for all the function, but you can also just use it on the free tier as well. So easiest way to figure it out.
And so, gang, all
that to email you, Will. I would use that to email. That's pretty intimidating to email the email.
Yeah, we're afraid.
I actually get that in my inbox a good bit, which is like it starts off with, "I'm a little nervous hitting send on this email to you."
I bet you do. Yeah, we can't even invite you back on the podcast. We'll be afraid to send the email. So first of all, team, everything Will just mentioned is going to be in the show notes. So when you want to learn more, you want to download the free trial, we're going to have all of those links in the show notes. And I want to thank Will Allred for joining us today from Lavender. As always, I'd like to thank my partner in crime here, David Fauser, for joining us and adding a great perspective. And most of all, gang, I'd just like to thank you for listening today. So we really appreciate those of you with that growth orientation that are trying to continue to evolve this profession that we're in. And so if you enjoyed today's podcast, please like and subscribe to the Selling Well podcast and tell your friends. And if there's something we can do to make these more valuable to you, please let us know. We're growth oriented. We love constructive criticism. So please send your criticism to me personally, Mark Cox at inthefunnel.com. We love constructive criticism. That's my personal email. I check that, Mark Cox at inthefunnel.com. We'll see everyone next time on the Selling Well podcast. And thanks again to Will Allred. What do you think today, David? How are we gonna treat our emails differently moving forward?
Well, I mean, 25 to 40, but you know what? It just makes so much sense. Like it really does, because I just think, like, I actually looked, I don't have 400,000 or 500,000 unread emails. I have 153,000 unread emails, and that's not to brag by any means, Mark. It's not, it's just, I get a lot of spam, and you know what? As soon as I sniff out that it's some sort of like just email, it's over. But it also makes me think of my communication style as well too, and just being really rigorous on what am I trying to accomplish here and how can I get this so it's really to the point to get what I need. And I think that's reality. And I think what Will did for me today personally was to really help me see that, acknowledge that reality. And it was a really, really good, I mean, for such a young guy to be that wise is almost a little crazy, but certainly a pretty interesting character.
Well, super interesting guy, great conversation. And like you and like a lot of our best clients, the real value they provide is insight and expertise. It's not the particular product or service that they sell. And I know you take that approach with helping your clients get better outcomes and run better businesses. And many of our top clients are the same way. And he's somebody like that too. He's got a technology, but really what he's providing is thought leadership and expertise in terms of how we should communicate more effectively to clients by putting them first. Right back at you, David, in terms of the common sense revolution. It makes all the sense in the world to me. And I can tell when I'm sending emails, the longer the email, the more tired I am. When I'm in my best self and sharp, very concise, very, very to the point, and it's a little bit of the Mark Twain, I wrote you a long letter. If I had more time, I would have written you a short letter.
Yep, absolutely. I really liked his deliberate approach too. Like instead of just spraying all, like we have 7,000 customers, like, oh yeah, just send it to all 7,000 customers. But this deliberate approach, methodical approach to say, you know what, I'm just trying to drive a conversation. Talk about taking all the pressure off your situation. And I think there's like a bit of a mind frame shift there. There's a bit of a confidence you can have when you're in, and I actually really believe that it would lead to success. And I think the most interesting thing is, Mark, and we talked about it in the call, is that how few people in our profession are doing these simple things. And in my heart of hearts, I actually believe that by doing these simple things will really set you apart and make you unique and different compared to the others that are in the market, because so many people are just in the old school way of doing things. And I like your point too about this revolution coming of our profession and getting back to some basics and really just being there for the client. I couldn't agree with you more. It's so I think that's a real advantage for us to start focusing on these things and improving our game in all aspects, including email marketing.
Common sense revolutions coming in professional sales. We're going to actually have to be good at this, and we have to treat it like a profession, and it's management consulting. I think those are some kind of constant themes we'll take moving forward. Boy, another great conversation, David. As always, thank you so much for joining, sir.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I mean, I love it. And what an interesting guy Will is. So I'm sure a lot of people would have appreciated this conversation.
I hope so. We'll see you next time.